Sorry, I would have liked to have been there, but I caught a little COVID, so I'm having to do this remotely. But I'm excited to be able to talk to Sean and kind of go over some of this subject matter. Just to intro Sean a little bit, when I think about, the reason that I took a board position at the Graziadio Business School and the way we thought about this symposium was to create prepared minds. And in my estimation, there's nobody who's got more of a prepared mind than Sean does, because he has defied that categorization that puts you into one box or another, which is either you're a business person or a creative person. And I think what Sean has done is just kind of obliterate that concept as a false dichotomy. And I think it recognizes the idea that whether it's in business or creativity, it's the breakthrough ideas that really matter and the things that really drive businesses. So the ability to talk to him and think about not only from the experience and the credibility, but the ability to come at issues from both the creative and the business perspective and to synthesize those issues, that's, I think, especially important in terms of having, Sean in this discussion. Just to give you a sense of, his history, we'll get into the Jellysmack of it all in a second, but he's been both a consultant and an executive dean in academia. He's been CEO of RTL Digital. He was president of MTV. He was GM and executive vice president of digital and strategy at Discovery Communications. He was senior VP of digital initiatives, new media programming at HBO. He was head of development.
Where I worked for Carmi. Yahoo. Let's be clear, where I worked for Carmi.
We'll get to that in a second. But you were at A. Smith, as a content creator. So Sean, before we get into the jellies, is there any place you haven't worked?
It's funny, what's not on there? I was also an intern at Sony. So someone pointed out to me, the only place I have not worked in the traditional media brands at this point is Comcast NBC. That's the only one left. Okay. To be clear, I'm not aspiring to add another one to my resume, but it's the only one.
It could be a goal, but I'm guessing that you're onto something interesting with Jellysmack. So why don't you just set it up for us? What is Jellysmack?
Yeah, so Jellysmack is one of the kind of small number of creator economy unicorns. And our focus is that we use technology to detect and develop the most talented video creators. So we use proprietary data and AI technology to find creators, identify them, and then help them get the most value of their content by moving it between platforms and helping them scale their business. So we're a trusted partner behind the scenes to many top creators like Mr. Beast, PewDiePie, Brad Mondo, Daz Daily, as well as a ton of other creators within specific content verticals and niches. So that's the company in a nutshell. It was founded by 3 creators who had built a very successful multi-stream, multi-genre business on social platforms. But because they didn't come from traditional media, they didn't know all the rules we get told when you grow up in media. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't have these things, you can't have. And so because they didn't know that, turns out they broke a lot of the rules we've grown up with using technology to scale the business. And then along came a moment where they're like, I think we could offer this to other content creators and help them scale their business as successfully as we did. That was sort of the genesis of the last round of funding for the company.
So what can you tell us about the way this system works?
Yeah, so basically the way the system works is it's the same tech that we use to build success to scale our channels over multiple verticals in digital. Because one of the things that's a misnomer when you're working in digital content, and Carmi, you and I used to laugh about this when we were looking at digital content when we were at HBO, is that just because a piece of content is successful and is in a glowing rectangle does not mean it moves to every other glowing rectangle. So no one would ever say in the traditional business, hey, I like that episode 47 of South Park last night. Let's put it in a movie theater tomorrow. you'd be laughed out of the room, right? There's format issues, there's marketing issues, distribution, audience challenges. Well, the same thing actually exists even in digital, right? So a video that is successful on YouTube does not mean it will be successful on Facebook, does not mean it'll be successful on Snap. In fact, the formats are different of all three of them. So there's structural differences, there's audience differences. So for some of our content providers, the audience you get on one platform is only a 10% overlap with another. So there's very significant differences to understand those things. And so we were really good at doing that. So as a result of that, using all that data and technology, we end up partnering with creators to help them consistently overperform on other platforms. So that involves, for example, we scan 10 million creators' content on a daily basis. And we use that to detect what content and what creators are most likely to actually be successful moving their content from one platform to the other, right? We then do massive repurposing and editing to every one of the platforms to make sure that it will actually transfer and be native to the platform that it's then on. We do industrial scale multivariate testing. So in plain English, that means is if we make a video for you, we have probably made 30 distinct versions of it that we have tested multiple times in front of your audience before we actually publish your final piece of content. So imagine if you and I were making a movie today, Carmi, we could not that you just sit down with an audience and say, what did you think about it? That every frame of that video could be tested against the exact audience it was supposed to go to and then re-optimized is exactly what we do in the digital space. We then distribute the most optimized version of that video at the right time, at the right place, into the right ecosystem. And then on top of which have another set of AI and data, which optimizes marketing campaigns against the specific audience for that specific video and that specific platform. And this all happens in real time at a global scale. As you can imagine, as a creator, that's a really hard thing to do by yourself. Because of the amount of infrastructure done on it. So we behind the scenes help creators basically successfully exist and create content on multiple platforms without having all to build the infrastructure to try and do it themselves.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, there's really two directions that your AI is exploring. One is the platforms and what's working and what's needed. And the other is this world of content creation and what's being, offered. And so once you identify, like in my imagination, there's some something that flashes on somebody's screen that says, it's a match, content.
You know what? That's actually not far. We have, so there's tools and they named them. One of the things here are named Jellysmack. You can imagine, we jelly/everything inside the company. So all of the products or tech functions have names. So there is something called Jelly Pulse that does exactly what you just said, Carmi. It sits around, it finds certain behaviors, and it'll create a score and ranking system, which will cause an alert to the sales team or to the partnership outreach team and say, hey, we just discovered Carmi Zlotnik. He's hitting these sort of variables. He has this sort of scale. He's probably viable for a conversation about helping him transfer to Snapchat. You should probably go have a conversation with him.
So is there a way for somebody to do something that will get your attention or that will, maybe game the system a little bit and move themselves to the top as opposed to just making whatever they're making?
Not really, because, not any more than any sort of naturally occurring content that would happen, right? So, because successful content creators are generally following within some standard deviation certain patterns, right? So, and I think that's relatively true in most media. There's a reason that genres work in certain platforms and certain styles of creator or auteurs work on certain sort of platforms. That's true in digital as well. Our system is just better at sort of fighting the early signals, for lack of a better descriptor. So you don't have to become Mr. Beast before we identify you. In fact, not inconsequential of some of the names that I mentioned were people we found when they were very, very small. And the Jellysmack system powered them to millions of fans on their pages. And some of them, we have one partner we work with on Snap that had no presence on Snap and was we'll call it a pretty average performing YouTube. And by the time we took hold of them, we moved them to like 10 million subs in less than a year.
And so is there a part of this that incorporates machine learning? Does the system get smarter as it keeps going, or
Yes.
how can you
So
describe how that works?
we have a very large amount of PhDs who speak when I'm in a room with them at a level that I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. So our data science team is pretty substantial. Actually, one of the interesting things is there's a few hubs of data science in the world, right? Obviously, Silicon Valley has a very large component. New York is very strong. Toronto, interestingly, because they have some really good schools that crank them out. And then also Paris, turns out, has a very large, where our founders are from. So we have I think the last I saw the count, we have maybe 150 people in the data sciences teams. And so their charter is to use machine learning, not necessarily always machine learning, but use algorithmic capabilities. It could be AI, it could be machine learning, to always try and figure out how we optimize the jobs to be done in creation so that we can make them more efficient. So that can be as complex as, can you find early signals to find people that might actually transfer to another platform? Or it can be, can you figure out a way to auto edit 80% of a cut before we have to have a human being take it the rest of the way and finish the creative side of it. So it's partially efficiency. It's also partially like, how do you do this at scale?
So, like when we were at HBO, a lot of what we were focused on is the brand building, and, thinking about differentiating yourself in the marketplace and doing something that was truly unique. Do you find that as systems are more exposed to a kind of, algorithmic thinking, algorithmic analysis, that there's either a homogenization or an expansion of what works? Because if everybody's being directed to do more of the same because it works, eventually it, starts to become very, commonplace or banal or trite. And we both know the things that really break through are, these things that, probably weren't formed by an algorithm, but were formed by human thinking and human creativity. So, I mean, if you could talk a little bit about how you think about that, how the system works through it, and, in terms of content creators coming up, like, how should they think about it?
So I am, for good or for bad, one of those people who believe that technology isn't necessarily inherently good or bad. It's sort of how you use the construct and what box you stick it in. So let's talk about algorithms for a second. Now, obviously, we know content algorithms can cause problems, hence all the misinformation stuff we see all over, the social platforms, and the concerns we, across the world, people societally have about this issue. But the reaction is like, what did X platform do to cause this? Well, it turns out it's not caused, because the way algorithms generally work is you give them a large data sets and you say, I want a specific outcome. And so the first potential challenge that happens when you're using algorithmic approaches to it is that the same problems that we have in traditional creative development is that there's human beings in the loop, which means there's biases, right? So we all know, you can get into a creative trap. I fall into some, everybody can fall into them. You can have certain beliefs. Like you and I talked once, it's like, when I came up in the creative industry, they're like, you can never do Westerns, live music, these are like rules. Live music doesn't work on television, right? These are absolute rules. What's the #1 show on cable right now? It's a Western called Yellowstone. By the way, it's also a soap opera. The other don't do, right? What's the #1 thing in unscripted on most networks? It's a live variety show that is mostly live music. So it turns out even human systems have these biases built in them. So if you're using a data set to train it, it only knows what it's seen. So you'll see these problems. Let's say we're doing language training. If you do language training and you use the data set that was all Southern dialect, it would actually bring in biases towards cultural issues that you would never see because you use the Southern dialect data set. So the same problem you have when you're doing content thing, it only knows the pool of which it's playing in. That's its bound. The second problem you have when you do an algorithm is you train it for an outcome. So in the case of what happened for a lot of the misinformation is that platforms would tell their algorithm, what I really want is engagement, because the longer someone stays here, the more ads I can show them. That seems like a logical, I would have made that, by the way, I did make the same conclusion when I built some algorithms. That's a logical conclusion. The challenge is that an algorithm is not a human. It has no morals or ethics or whatever. It just says, I want that outcome. and it basically just brute forces its way until it causes that outcome. So you don't actually know in the black box what it did. You just know it caused the outcome, right? And so it turns out, if you think about it instinctively, what causes more engagement with content? We instinctively know this as creative people, emotion. That's why we tell stories. The more emotional the story, the more connected. That's why Steven Spielberg is so good at manipulating us, right? Emotion gets engagement. So it turns out the algorithm figured that out its own, but it turns out what emotions get the most engagement? Pretty extreme ones like rage, anger, really get emotional reaction. But again, an algorithm doesn't know rage or anger exists. It just goes, I want to make maximum outcome. So the result of this, as we saw in the election cycle, is whether you're on the right or left, if you spend enough time on a platform, it gets you to something extremist. Because all the algorithm was trying to do is get you to stay longer, which meant it was gravitating towards the human capabilities for emotion. So that's the flaw of algorithms. So we know this as designers of algorithms, even when we're working on a global stage. So by our very nature, that data science team knows this constraint and is always designing in new data, right? Like always introduce a new genre, always bring in a sort of serendipity. And a lot of this is because what I believe ultimately happens with technology over time is that rarely has technology in the creative industry eliminated people. It might have displaced them, right? What it does, it basically enables greater greater creativity, because you have the ability to actually offload things that were lower value. An example being like, it used to take like 100 people to do a remote shoot. Now it's in a box. We didn't stop doing remote shoots. It wasn't like, oh, the box is going to start doing the shoot. You still have to have creative decision. Same thing in music. We started doing auto tune, and now you can basically, anybody on their laptop can basically record an album. It didn't stop music. The creative component of music is actually at an accelerated pace, but the sort of low value things. And that's what I think algorithms ultimately will do in content. Because I don't think they'll get rid of the spark moments. I think that's what humans do great, but I think it'll enhance those spark moments to have a higher probability of reaching the right audiences.
But so recognizing that, our industry is both, has an economic and a creative component, like what would be your recommendation to a content creator? Is it to pay attention to the algorithm and think about how your show or your piece of content is going to rate in a system like that? Or is it to pursue the thing that you think is that breakthrough, that aha, eureka moment idea, where this is something that doesn't exist anywhere else, and I think it needs to, and therefore I'm motivated enough where I'm going to take it on myself to put it out into the world?
So, Carmi, I think you asked the existential question to every creative on any platform, digital or not, right? It's that every one of these systems, whether it's the velocity that digital moves at or theatrical, right, has some sort of system that people believe is the way to be successful. And by the way, it has, making a round number, maybe 90% accuracy. The 3 standard deviations of the things happen within that, but the outlier events are what moves those standard deviations of it. So that in the creative environment, what I tell new creators is like, look, the first thing you need to do is just start making something, because unlike, and I'm aging myself here, when I entered the business, like you wanted to do something, you needed a crew, you're like there's distribution implications, but now anybody, like, you have the entire equipment I have on your phone, every consumer does, distribution cost is 0, so just get started. The second thing is, I do tell them, you need to learn what the algorithms are doing, right? Follow the best practices. And that's the same truth I would tell any creator. It was like, when I was coming up into film school, you didn't learn film by just randomly doing. You did some of that, but you're also like, I'm going to watch Godard films. I'm going to watch, spaghetti westerns. You're going to watch the great genres to basically learn best practices. That's true in digital as well. The trade-off consequence, I would say, in the algorithmic pain, if you talk to creators, and part of what Jellysmack solves for them, is that the algorithms in digital move much faster. And the creative demand on a creator is much more draining. Because as the cost of production has come down, the infrastructure around creators has shrunk. So like, a person who's running a very successful business that's, that might make them like, $1 million a year, let's say, might have a team of one. And so it's real burnout is one of the biggest things we solve for creators. Like, because we tell them, we give you time, we take capital risk, we take risk away from you, and we give you the opportunity to expand your audience, all without risk. So it's the biggest challenge for them. So you can't exist in digital without paying attention to the algorithm. To be successful, though, you have to allocate some percentage of your time. And actually, I always use HBO as the example for this when I talk to creators. I said, one of the great things that HBO did when we were in the greenlight meetings is that they had the normal conversation, like, should we greenlight Band of Brothers Pacific? It's going to cost us a crazy amount of money, but we think it's going to drive this amount of subs. And so you can make the ROI case. But there was, as you and I know, there was the 15 to 20% of, we said, bring it. That if you had a baby and you really wanted to go, but you weren't sure you could make the case, you're like, this is my brand call for this year. I'm going to put Flight of the Conchords on the air. Right? Because like, wait, you want to put two unknown New Zealand folk singers? Yes. Yeah, that's definitely like no one's. And so I also create like, you need that moment. You have to introduce serendipity in the system. But by the way, just like in any traditional, most of that will fail. But without doing it, the algorithm doesn't see something new, the audience doesn't see something new, and it doesn't happen. And so it is a practice they have to build into it because they feel tremendous pressure. Just like if I had a hit television show right now, probably called Chicago something, is you're like, I should just make more Chicago's because it works. And the pressure is immense because of the economic pressures. But as a creative, you have to do the same thing. You have to be like, I've got to hold 5-10% of the introduction into the system because the algorithm won't find it for you. It won't.
So in terms of that ownership and the economics, how does Jellysmack approach the content creators?
So we have a very unique model that's very aligned to creators' needs because our founders are creators. So at the end of the day, we don't take a stake in any of their intellectual property. I mean, there's exceptions, but it's usually a requested thing. So it's basically a classic licensing relationship. We say, hey, you have a set of rights to make video and use it on a set of platforms. We'd like to license for a period of time a subset of those rights and create new assets for you on another platform. And we'll take all the capital risk, the marketing risk, the operating risk. If we're successful, we will share in the upside together. So we're completely aligned with what's in the best interest of the creator. They don't take any capital or time risk. We take all of the risk. And so if we're successful, we generate revenue on both our behalves. If we're unsuccessful, they got a free work from us. Not free to me.
Who owns the copyright? If there's other exploitation of the project, if it goes on to some other.
I'll use an example. So like, if we have a property creator says to us, hey, most creators are on YouTube. It's the #1 monetization platform. So that's where the biggest need to move to another platform is. They're like, hey, I'd like to move to Snapchat. We're the best in the world at it. So we're like, okay, we'll do a Snapchat deal. It only allows me to do a Snapchat deal. I can't take it to Facebook. That's a separate set of rights. I couldn't make a movie out of it. I couldn't make a commercial. I can't do anything other than operate it on the platform. It's very much like syndication or traditional consumer products licensing business. If someone came to you and I at HBO and said, hey, I want to license True Blood for a video game, they can only make, and it was like, and I want it to be a PS4 platform game, that is literally the only thing they can do. Our rights work exactly the same way.
So if like when you look at the landscape, knowing, looking at it from where you've been and where you are now and the knowledge sets that both experiences present for you, like, what do you think doesn't exist but should? Where are the, kind of areas of content that should be exploited more? And, is there some sense of you know, especially people who've come from, you know, like more mainstream content and are, you know, continuing to try to make, you know, prestige programming, that there's this, you know, kind of, you know, barbell effect where you've got prestige programming that's multiples of millions of dollars an episode, and, you know, you've got these content creators. How do you look at those opportunities for different people? And is there a way to start at one side and work your way up, or should you just go at one and focus on that as your career strategy?
I generally advise people to choose your foundation and be great at it and never stop being great at it. I would say if you can handle the burn rate of a digital platform, there's nothing more powerful than having a direct, because the platform is still kind of in your way, a direct relationship with your consumers, right? At the end of the day, the people who have generally made jumps to other businesses, like I could call it the Oprahfication of themselves, right? Have generally had a very strong digital audience that they had a distinct, passionate, and real true community with. And then we're able to, like, I'm going to open a makeup line, or I'm going to do a comedy special. They're able to move through the value chain. Like Rhett and Link are a great example. They've been at it for 15 years, right? They've done television shows, but their daily relationship with their audience has allowed them to do all those things and have success so they can build a business. It's the same thing. If someone was an unbelievably successful former HBO executive making very great television shows, I'd be like, keep making great television shows, and that's the way it generally works. And by the way, it's true in all media, right? I've never met someone like, I wrote a novel and then I became the greatest actor of all time. They generally, like, you've got to build your craft and then you expand. It's not different in digital, but digital does give you far more direct relationship, and for lack of better descriptor, the potential to have like an annuity that allows you the freedom to look at the other things from a different. So what you'll see when you negotiate with digital talent, like say do a TV show, is they're like, I don't really need to do that. I have total creative control of what I do. I have a complete relationship with my team. I don't get creative notes from anybody. Why would I do that? And so it actually is bringing a little bit more auteur as they move up the value chain, because they generally bring something of value to the exchange with the traditional side. They're like, oh, I'm bringing, 15 million fans. I got to export more out of this.
So if you were a fledgling content creator and you had, all the capabilities that you had, you could decide, kind of which path you were going to go down. How would you, like, if you were to be starting right now, how would you strategize a career path? Or is that not even a thing that
no. So my general advice is, again, assuming a complete generic average person, I'm like, look, if you're trying to kind of get relatively quickly famous, the most lottery ticket way to do it today, and it changes every few years, is TikTok. The consequence of that is that short form content is a very draining exercise because it's a very high burn rate. You got a lot of hits, right? You got to do. The second thing is that it doesn't really build a strong community. It builds awareness. So it's a great, and by the way, TikTok doesn't monetize you as a creator very well. So it's a great awareness builder, right? So it's a great promotion engine that can sort of hit very fast. So I was like, you're probably going to start on TikTok, but I would tell you simultaneously, you should be on one, if not two more platforms. If you're going to be a TikTok creator, you should probably simultaneously start on YouTube, which has real monetization. So you can build a real business there. You can use your TikTok audience to help you build that. The second thing is, like, build something direct, whether that's a podcast or a blog or a newsletter, something that gives you an actual outside of a platform direct relationship. That'll set you up for the more success, because the creators, even the small ones who have some sort of scale, have a direct relationship with their creators, and they have a little bit of diversity from day one. That's the first thing I'd say. And the only thing I'd change is I might change some of the platforms I recommended based on your genre. So if I was a lifestyle creator, I'd be like, swap out TikTok with Pinterest potentially, or YouTube with Pinterest. If you were a business person, I was like, hey, swap out LinkedIn for TikTok. Right? You might change the platform you were going for your promotion from. But other than that, it's just start the work.